I have a mimic that follows and tortures me. Get your blanket, get your snack, get your coffee, get your whatever, because we have another scary story submitted by one of my followers, and this person is actually asking for help. So if you have any advice once you hear the story, let me know in the comments so that they can read it. They want to be anonymous, but they're going to be reading the comments. I have a mimic that follows and tortures me. It's been attached to me since I bought my double wide. Super cheap, might I add. It was only $500 in 2019. It terrorized me and my family for almost 4.5 years until we just finally had enough and sold the mobile home for dirt cheap. We just wanted peace, and we didn't get any. Roughly 2 months of normalcy went by after we sold our home and a weight was lifted. It felt as if things were going to be okay, and then it started again. Things misplaced frequently, disappearing and popping up in different places, hearing steps down the hallway, whispers in our ear at night, eerie feelings throughout the day, and then it started to show itself. For multiple nights in a row, I would have the same reoccurring nightmare/false awakenings. I'm in my bed and I'm sleeping on my back, looking around my bedroom. I'm positive I'm awake, but it's quiet. It's so quiet that it's loud. It's not the silence that bothers me. It's the feeling of a presence, a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach that something is wrong, terribly wrong. And about the time that I make the deduction, I can taste pennies and fear in my mouth. There's something standing in my doorway, and it's not my husband and it's not my kids. It's tall, illogically tall. It's damn near 2 or 3 inches taller than the doorframe itself. It's solid black, not like smoke or mist, but a solid black figure, and it has definition to it. I can make out features, exaggerated arms halfway down its body with sharp, gnarly fingers and long, slender legs. It's got posture to it, like it's hunched over slightly, positioned to lunge right after me. I stare back into the blackness, my heart racing in my chest, so loud that I can hear it in my ears. It says my name, softly and with stern intention, in a voice that I can almost recognize. The tone it uses is similar to when a child does something bad and you call out their name. A shiver runs down my spine. The hairs on my arms rise. I shut my eyes as tight as I can and take deep breaths. You're not real. After an excruciating 30-second pause, it responds, and it sounds exactly like my husband. Yes, I am. Immediately after it says this, I'm awake and now sitting up in bed. I jump up when I realize my husband isn't next to me and rush to the living room. And there he is, passed out on our sectional couch in the deepest sleep I might have ever witnessed yet. A cold chill runs over me. What the hell? Was I dreaming? Was it really him standing in the doorway and my eyes playing tricks on me? Was anyone there at all? The dream was so hyper-realistic that I could literally make out every detail of my room down to the scuff marks on our wood floors. But this isn't the last encounter. I definitely have lots and lots more. I also have no one to talk to about this because obviously most people don't believe these things, so you almost become isolated. Let me know if you want to hear more and maybe ask someone to comment if they can help. Definitely still happening until this day.
On the beach at Sullivan's Island, South Carolina, and I actually came here to tell you a story that was submitted by a listener about her great-grandfather's ring that was thrown into this ocean and supposedly still washes up on this beach. And he swore that ring was cursed until the day he died. Spooky Scary Storytime submission came from Claire, and she said she's never told anyone this outside of her family, but there's a first time for everything. And she says that her great-grandfather, his name was Harlan, he was from Charleston, South Carolina, and he was also a World War II vet. And in 1944, during the push up the Italian peninsula, he bought a heavy gold ring with a deep red stone from a street vendor in Naples, Italy, and he brought it back to Charleston in 1946. Back at my hotel, I'm going to film the rest of the story here because it was too windy out there and I didn't bring a mic. But in 1946, Harlan returned to South Carolina and he brought the ring with him to give to his wife as a gift for their anniversary. But within 2 weeks of putting it on, she had passed. She had been otherwise healthy, but one afternoon sitting on the porch, she started to get very pale, and that night she passed in her sleep beside him. Her lips were blue in the morning, and the doctors chalked it up to exhaustion. Harlan couldn't bear to look at the ring after that and put it in a box until his oldest daughter got married. And on her wedding day, he slipped it onto her finger and she wore it during the ceremony at St. Philip's. 2 weeks after her wedding, her new husband found her dead in their marital bed. And it was the same thing. She was pale as a ghost, her lips were blue, and the doctors deemed it congenital weakness. But Harlan apparently knew better. After the death of his oldest daughter, Harlan could not bear to keep the ring in his possession any longer, and he walked it down to a pawn shop on King Street that was sandwiched between an oyster house and a tailor. He gave it to the pawnbroker, and the pawnbroker gave him $30. Harlan felt a weight lift off his shoulders as he passed it on, and he thought that that was the end of it. Late 1970s, Harlan had left his family home and moved across the river and was now living near Sullivan's Island, and every night he would walk the beach. He liked it because it was very close to the fort where he had once stood watch after the war. Long after he picked up this habit of walking the beach, one hazy dusk, he was walking the beach and a woman stepped out of the water, and she was wearing a white dress. She was no older than 25. She was soaking wet with dark curly hair that swept across her face, and she slowly walked toward him. She stopped a few feet from Harlan and slowly opened her palm, and in her palm was the heavy gold ring with the blood-red stone. Without a word, she picked it up with her other hand and pressed it into his palm, and he described her fingers as being ice cold. She leaned in close and whispered, "It always finds the one who spilled blood for it." He turned and walked back into the tide, and he screamed for her to stop, but she disappeared under the water. One second, he saw her white dress floating in the waves, and the next second, it was gone. He hurled the ring as far as he could throw it back into the water. He watched the sun glint off the gold before it disappeared beneath the surface. The thing was, Claire says it never stayed gone. A week later, he was walking the beach after a particularly bad storm when he looked down and saw a glint of something shiny in the sand. He looked down, and right below his boot was the ring. He thought it must have been a fluke, and he carried it home and buried it deep into the earth underneath a live oak in his backyard. The next morning, the earth where he had buried it was disturbed, and the ring sat on the ground next to the tree with bits of sand still caught in the setting, glinting underneath the sun. He thought an animal must have dug it up. So desperate, he drove to the middle of the Cooper River Bridge at midnight and dropped it into the water. 2 weeks later, Claire's father was fishing off of the same pier when he caught a fish and took it home to clean it. When he cleaned it in the kitchen sink, the ring tumbled out of the fish's stomach, caught the guard on the drain, and it was still warm. Claire says for the rest of his life, Harlan tried to break the curse. He confessed fragments of the truth to 3 different Italian priests and often sent money to various Italian war relief charities. Really before his death, he actually flew back to Naples for a week and spent a week wandering the old neighborhoods, asking anyone who would listen about a Strega's ring and a widow who passed in 1944, but nobody knew who or what he was talking about. It wasn't until his passing on his deathbed that he confessed how he had actually come into possession of this ring. He had never bought the ring from any vendor. In a bombed-out village just outside of Naples, he came across a young widow and her infant son. She wore the ring on her finger and offered it to him in exchange for her life. She told him that Strega, her grandmother, who was an Italian witch, had placed a blessing on the ring to protect her family. Harlan took the ring and put a single bullet in her chest anyway. In one of her last breaths, the dying woman apparently whispered some kind of curse on him, telling him that the ring would return again and again to members of his family until the debt was paid in full. Harlan passed that night, and they buried him without the ring, but it still didn't stay gone. Claire says all of this happened before she was born. This is just sort of the legend in her family, and she only believed it as something half true, like an old ghost story. A few months ago, she was walking the beach on Sullivan's Island when she saw a woman in a white dress who was soaking wet walking across the beach. She thought the woman was heading toward her. Instead, she approached a man, and she watched the woman lean in and reveal something in the palm of her hand. She whispered something to the man and turned and walked into the water before disappearing underneath the surface entirely. Watch the man watch the woman disappear into the water as well, and he just looked shocked. But after a moment, he looked down at his hand, and she saw him slip a ring onto his finger. He said, "I didn't see it up close, but I could tell it was gold from the way the sun caught it." I watched him turn and walk off in the opposite direction down the beach, and she said she didn't know him. She doesn't think he's part of her family. She doesn't know what happened to the ring, but she wonders if that debt is still being paid somewhere by someone else. I've been combing the beach looking for this ring since I've been out here, but I don't think this ring is meant for me.
My encounter with a ghost when I worked a night shift in a care home. This is my own true life story, not anyone else's. Never shared this story ever since it happened. So buckle up and listen. So at the time I was at university, I got a job part-time working only weekends at this care home to be able to fund my living, which is rent, bills, food, even my driving lessons at the time. So I just worked in this care home. I had student loan, but I didn't touch that anyway. Then I only worked day shifts. But on this occasion, I was on holiday from university. Sometimes I will stay back and not go back to where my parents live. I'll just stay there because I've already paid for, the rent. So anyway, a shift came up for night shift. And I thought, I'm on holiday, so why not? I will go for it. I accepted it. But then I remembered stories about people who worked night shifts telling me about that home. I didn't believe it. At first, I told them that it's just trying to scare each other. But then this happened to me on my night shift. Then I thought differently ever since that day. There was a young girl. She was in her 20s. She said she didn't want to go to, college or university. So she just worked in that care home. Anyway, she said on a night shift, She went upstairs to use the staff toilet, which is upstairs. And then it's just right outside next to the staircase. It's this massive staircase. This is an old building, like rich, family home, when you look back in the Victorian times. And it happens that one of the women who was like a resident in that care home, her parents owned that home when she was a child. And then to end up back in the same care home, now being looked after by carers, it was just like, mind blowing when she shared her stories. Anyway, I don't want to divert. This girl said after she went to the toilet, she was coming back downstairs and then she felt hands on her back, which pushed her down the stairs. She went tumbling down and screaming. On a night shift, you have two carers. This other carer who worked with her on that particular night could hear her screaming. She rushed there and she saw her laid there on the floor next to the staircase. She asked her what she was doing on the floor and she told her that she felt something on her back and the next minute she was pushed down. The other carer didn't believe her. Another story about that care home is that one of the residents was pushed down exact same staircase, but then they thought it was her sister because she used to be in the same home with her sister. Unfortunately, her sister passed away, the one that apparently they thought pushed her down the staircase. Then they would hear footsteps. They would hear people walking when all the residents are fast asleep in bed. They do the rounds, they'll check. But then when they go back down, they hear footsteps. So when I heard that, I thought this was just them messing about. I didn't believe it until this happened to me. Anyway, that particular night, we got there, we did everything that we needed to do. Bedtime, we put all the residents in bed. Then we could hear the radio come up exactly 12 midnight. I kid you not. I looked at the other carer and she looked at me. She's the one that normally works night shift. And she said, this is weird. She has never ever heard the radio come on. And I thought, where is this radio even coming on? We searched everywhere in the residence room downstairs. We went upstairs, we checked, nothing. When we went and sat down, it went off. Then it comes back on again, a few minutes again. Then we search and search. And then we realized that there's a radio that's actually in the home. It's like connected with some speakers. But you would have to actually put that radio on yourself. And none of us did. All the residents were fast asleep. A few minutes later, we could hear loud TV noise. The TV was on in one of the residents' room. We looked at each other and we thought, this can't be right because that resident at the time was in hospital. So who is putting this TV on? We go and we check. The TV is on in his room. Of course, he's in hospital. We check in the other rooms next to his room. All the residents were fast asleep. We go upstairs, we check, nothing. We turn the TV off. We come back downstairs. The TV has come on again on its own. This time, we unplugged it off the wall because we're thinking the TV is faulty. But tell me why. A couple of minutes as we go to sit down, the TV comes on again. There's voices coming from the TV. We daren't even go in that room again to check and see what's going on. But guys, hearing stories about ghosts, unusual things happening on night shift do really happen because I experienced this myself. This is my own true life story. Never shared it with anyone. This is the first time I'm sharing with. And it is scary. Ever since, I refused to work a night shift in that home until I left there. The home is now shut down. But God, weird things indeed truly happen.
I see y'all in my comments asking for duende videos, and I think I found the perfect one. So this girl says that this happened to her 3 years ago, and even now she has a really hard time getting over it because she still lives in the house, she still sleeps in her bed, and she just cannot stop constantly thinking about it. So her brother-in-law is an engineer, and he had been called to this place where they had found houses and wanted to build more houses there. Apparently this place was like in the middle of the forest. It was really beautiful. Basically, her brother-in-law had to go there and get a quote to see how much it was going to be to bring these houses back to life and even add more houses in the middle of this forest. At this point, he had taken a lot of trips back and forth with his team, and at the very last trip, he ended up taking his wife, which is the girl's sister, the one telling the story, and their kid. Being that the wife was a stay-at-home mom, he would usually take them on the trips that he would go to for work, and this was no exception. So on that day where he had taken his wife and his kid, they had basically been walking around and they were looking at how the forest was basically claiming that area again. It was almost like it was taking in those houses as their own, and they were going in these houses, and they also noticed how the little boy was playing around and he was very curious, so he was also entering these houses as well just to explore. So the kid had already entered a few houses, there was no problem, but when he entered this specific house, he came back out and he told his dad, hey, somebody's living in this house. The dad got really worried, so he told him to go with his mom, and he entered the house to see if anybody was in there. When he entered the house, he could tell that somebody had been staying there, and maybe for a while, but it was empty. empty and nobody was there at the moment. Because of this, he had to ask his team to come back and just go through every single house just to make sure nobody was staying there, nobody was living there in secret or hiding in the houses. Since he thought that maybe some people had been hiding there, he told his wife and kid to go back to the city, go back home, and that he would meet them later because now he had to review the houses again and make sure he got the right quotes. The mom and the kid ended up going to her sister's house because it was on the way back home and they hadn't seen each other in a really long time. So after a while of her and her sister catching up on each other and what's been going on, they realized that the boy had been very quiet, and when they looked at him, he was playing with what looked like a piece of rock. So the mom takes whatever that rock thing is out of his hand and asks him what this was, and the little boy tells her, "Oh, I found it at that abandoned house in the forest. He said he didn't want to be alone there." So the girl telling the story, which is the little boy's auntie and the mom's sister, she says that when she was looking at this thing, at first it did look like a rock, but now it almost looked like somebody had carved it. Like it wasn't a toy necessarily you would find at a store, but maybe something that looked like a toy that you would find at a museum. She explains how you really had to pay attention to it to know that it almost looked like a little gnome, like it had a pointy hat, but you couldn't see the feature details, but you could just tell that that's what it was, like somebody carved it, but there wasn't like all these intense features to it. Now, I don't know how they ignored the whole "he didn't want to be alone, so I brought him with me" thing that the boy said, but eventually the little boy ends up falling asleep and the sister says, "Hey, I think it's time for us to go." They go outside and they put the kid in the car still asleep, and she takes advantage of that and asks her sister if she could keep the little carved gnome. She knew that he would probably forget about the gnome and that he would lose interest in it, and she thought that that little gnome fit perfect with her aesthetic at home in her living room, so she wanted to keep that little figurine. Like, do you hear yourself? Do you hear yourself? And you're from Mexico, like what the fuck? Her sister actually agreed to let her keep that. No, obviously I would too, because what the fuck? Now, she says that she wants to confess that she didn't think that this little figurine was like something old or something that belonged in a museum. She thought that maybe somebody had carved it recently and that's why they found it, and she just wanted it inside of her house because it looked really cute with her aesthetic again. However, the same night would convince her that this little gnome thing, yeah, it wasn't, you know, fairly new. It was something really special. Everything strange happened the moment that she was in the shower, bitch. I swear, I feel like every time I shower I think of something spooky and I'm like, please don't let this happen to me while I'm naked. What the fuck? So it was 11 p.m. and she was in her restroom that is in her main bedroom, and as she's taking a shower, mind you, with the shower head on, she heard when somebody entered her bedroom. She literally turns off the shower, walks towards the restroom door to lock it because she can clearly hear those footsteps coming towards the restroom, and she thought maybe someone had came into her house and she didn't want them to walk in on her in the shower. However, as she did that, she locked the door. She then heard those footsteps go back out of her bedroom again. She immediately starts drying up herself. She puts clothes on and she just kept thinking, maybe it's my imagination, maybe I heard something that I didn't. Like, she just thought maybe it was just her, and that really didn't happen. She went all around her house. She even looked in her backyard and she didn't see anything weird or anybody there. She even went to the front door, opened up the door just to look, and she ended up finding her neighbor outside with the son that had came to visit. They ended up seeing her open the door and it was late at night, and she basically asked them if they saw anybody coming out of her house, and her neighbor tells her, no, we didn't see anybody, but we're gonna be out here for a little bit. If anything happens, you can just come and let us know. She didn't tell them anything, you know, she had just asked if they saw anybody come out, but she did go back inside her house and found comfort in knowing that her neighbor was gonna be outside in case she needed anything or if anything happened. So she goes back into her house a lot more calmer, obviously knowing that if anything happened, they were gonna be outside, and she walks into her bedroom. She lays in her bed and she said that she's getting so comfy with all the pillows that she has in the middle of the bed and just getting ready to get some rest. That was when she felt it. She felt something get off of the bed. Something that must have been on the bed when she laid down. Something that she didn't see because when she entered her bedroom, she had never turned the lights back on. She had just walked in, gotten into bed, hugged her pillows, and then felt when something got off of her bed. When she opened her eyes to see what it was, she said that she saw a silhouette. This wasn't a ghost. She said that she saw like a person, like if you were to see a person except really, really short, really small. This person had hopped off of the bed and walked towards the chair that she had by the window. And by this point, because of the moonlight coming in, she could see this little person a lot better and could tell that it had a little hat on the top of its head, and it was now sitting in her chair in that bedroom. You could deadass see my goosebumps right now. It took her seconds to get up and run out of that bedroom door, and she was running towards the living room. For some reason, in her head, she's like, let me see if that figurine, the rock, is there. It was not. The rock was gone. It was not in the spot that she had left it in. For some reason, she also didn't dare go and ask her neighbor for help because she was embarrassed, and she was also scared that they were gonna think she's crazy. So she ended up getting her car keys and she slept inside of her car. That duende better be paying fucking rent, because what do you mean you slept in your car? And she didn't go back in at all. She had no plans of going back into her house that night. The morning when she wakes up, she calls her sister and she's like, hey, we need to take that figurine back to where your kid found it because something weird is happening. This sister was in agreement and was really worried because apparently the little boy had been having nightmares all night long, and nightmares that her and her husband couldn't wake him up from. The boy ends up telling them that he was having nightmares that he was in that abandoned house and that he couldn't find his way out. That same day, her brother-in-law ended up taking the figurine, and she doesn't know if he took it back to the same house or if they put it anywhere else. All she knows is that she didn't experience anything further in her house, and her nephew also didn't have those nightmares again. What she knows is that the construction of that zone, the houses in the forest, did continue, but for some reason they never remodeled that house where they found the duende in, and they more so used it as storage for everything that they were building and stuff. Till this day, that house is as it was 3 years ago when they found that thing in there. They have not made updates to the house at all. But what do you guys think?
Hello and welcome back to a series of spooky stories, The Haunted Tea Spill. This series is brought to you by all things spooky and ungodly amounts of paranormal activity. Per usual, my cute necklace that has my initial on it. It's down there if you want it. Now onto the story. When I was a kid growing up at the height of the craft era, like a lot of girls back then, my friends and I became fascinated with witchcraft. I have never seen that movie. I know, I'm telling spooky stories and I haven't seen the fucking crap. I'm a fucking imposter. We'd hold little seances trying to summon spirits, not really understanding what we were doing, just curious and a little reckless. Like a fucking tea party. Most of the time, nothing happened. We usually gathered in my basement or at my friend's house, which sat directly across from a cemetery. Always a cemetery. Even then, we knew that it was the perfect setting to scare ourselves, but we never really thought anything would actually follow us home. See, that's the problem. We don't ever think. But after a while, things started to change. At my house, strange noises began coming from the basement at night. It sounded like toys were moving on their own. I would lie in bed and hear what seemed like my Barbie car rolling back and forth across the floor. Some nights I could have sworn I heard faint voices coming from downstairs. It was subtle at first, but enough to make me uneasy. Then one night, something happened that I've never been able to explain. Besides the seance tea parties that you were having, I feel like that explains it pretty well. I heard my little brother call my name. That wasn't unusual. He was afraid of the dark and hated going to the bathroom alone. He would often pass the bathroom just to come get me. So when I heard him, I didn't think twice. I got out of bed and just started walking towards my bedroom door. But before I even reached it, something felt off. And then I realized that wasn't my brother. What I heard next was laughter. Not his, not anyone's that I recognized. It was wrong. It echoed down the hallway as something ran past my door. I didn't see it clearly, but I heard it. Fast, deliberate footsteps until it disappeared into the hallway closet. That closet was never normal. It wasn't just a place for coats. It looked like it led up into the attic with steep, narrow steps hidden behind the door. Maybe it was a portal that was opened up by the tea party seances. Even during the day, it felt unsettling. At night, it was something else entirely. I didn't go after it. I went straight back to my bed, pulled the covers over my head, and stayed there until morning. To this day, I can't explain what I heard or what ran into that closet, but I know one thing for sure. It wasn't my brother. Years later at my brother's college graduation, the memory came up again. That's when my mom finally admitted something that made everything even more unsettling. She told us that she had been experiencing strange things in that house too. Noises, unexplained moments, but she never said anything at the time because she didn't want to scare us. Maybe you should have, and they could have brought up the tea party seances that they were having. Just hosting a cute little seance in the basement. Whose turn is it to light the candles? Something that I find funny is a lot of the parents in these stories will be told by their children that crazy things are happening and they won't believe them. Or they'll act like nothing's going on because they don't want to acknowledge it or freak the kids out even more. My mom used to freak me out by being paranoid about shit. She was always thinking that there was something in the attic. We always thought that the house was haunted. I'd never have to worry about my mom also putting things off, talking about it. she would bring it to us and say, hey, so I think that something's living in there. But I digress. Rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least scary, creepy, spooky, 10 being most. If you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. I'll see y'all the next episode. Stay spooky, friends.
I have another abandoned house spooky story time. A follower named Jules sent me the story, and she says that one summer she went to go visit her dad, and one day she was bored. Her and her friend decided to go into this abandoned house. Like I mentioned, they were bored. They just wanted to walk around, see if there's anything cool left inside this house. And about 10 minutes into being there, her friend gets a phone call. She answers it. She looks at her and she's like, hey, I'm going to go take this outside. I'll be right back. Jules tells her, okay, cool. Can you just like holler at me or call me, tell me that you're coming back inside so you don't scare me, you don't freak me out. And her friend was like, period. So Jules is walking around, she's looking at everything, and she can see her friend is standing outside, kind of by the sidewalk area, and she's just pacing and she's on the phone. Jules is kind of over it. She's like, okay, anyways, I'm gonna continue. She has a flashlight. She's just walking around. She goes into one of these rooms and she sees her friend kind of like run past the doorway. Jules is like, okay, what are you doing? Are you trying to scare me? I told you to call me before you come inside. So she kind of goes outside the hallway, and as she's going towards that room, there's like another hallway that goes like this, and she can see her friend is kind of going around that hallway. Jules is telling her, okay, what are you doing? Where are you going? She's shining the light and it's a dead end. She's like, hello, where'd you go? Nobody there. Then she gets a phone call from her friend. She answers it and she's like, hey, I just came inside. Where did you go? And who were you talking to? I heard you talking to somebody. And Jules is like, what do you mean? I saw you pass by the room that I was just in. Was that not you? And her friend's like, no, I literally just walked inside the house. What's crazy is that Jules says that this literally looked exactly like her friend, wearing the same exact outfit. So now they're both kind of like roaming around the house trying to see, okay, who was in this house? There's nobody there. And as they're trying to leave, they literally see someone just like shoom, right past by them. Of course, they absolutely dip. They're scared. They're freaking out. And so this day, Jules says that she doesn't know what it was, what she saw, but she swears up and down that this was an exact replica of her friend. And her friend was like, obviously that wasn't me. I was outside the whole time. And where Jules followed, whatever this was, it was a dead end. There was nowhere for them to go. So yes, mimics are definitely real. I don't ever want to see one. I'm scared. No, thank you. Thank you so much to Jules for sending me this spooky story. If you guys have any stories that you'd like for me to read, please send them via DM or email because I'd love to read them. And I will see you guys in the next spooky story. Bye.
What would you do if you went camping and your friend's voice called you outside of your tent in the middle of the night, and when you looked, nobody was there? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about a woman who went camping with some friends in Oregon, and it went so badly that she says that she doesn't camp anymore. This happened in Oregon a couple years ago. Me and two friends drove out for a weekend because one of them had this idea that we needed a real outdoors reset before one of us moved away. I wasn't even that into camping. I liked sitting by a fire for a few hours, sure, but I was never one of those people who wanted to hike 10 miles into nowhere or sleep on the ground for fun. But they talked me into it because it was only supposed to be one night, and one of them was really familiar with that area. It was pretty remote, though. More than I realized when I had agreed to go. No campground office, no row of neighboring tents, none of that. It was one of those Forest Service areas where you basically find a spot, you set up, and you're on your own. We got there in the afternoon, we pinched our tents near each other, we built a fire, we ate, we stayed up talking. It was all very normal. We each had our own small tent. That part matters. Nothing weird happened until the middle of the night. I woke up because I heard my friend Leah calling my name. Just quietly at first, from outside my tent. I remember opening my eyes and feeling annoyed more than scared because I thought she had to pee and didn't want to walk to the edge of the trees alone. It was that kind of tone. Not panic, just a, hey. So I unzipped the little flap at the top enough to look out, but nobody was there. I could see our dying fire, the shapes of the other tents, and the trees around us,
but not Leah. I called her name once, not loud, and right away I wish I hadn't. The voice came back, same place outside my tent, but different somehow, lower and sharper. It said, "Why won't you come out?" I froze. I shut the flap right away and laid back down like if I stayed still enough, maybe whatever that was would lose interest. My heart was going crazy. I could hear the blood in my ears, and then I heard something moving around the tent. Not like little footsteps, but they were heavy and they were slow, like whatever was out there had weight to it. I could see the shadow through the fabric. It was going around me in a circle, not brushing the tent, just close enough to block what little moonlight there was. It made one full slow pass and then another. I kept waiting to hear one of my friends unzip their tent or say my name for real, but there was nothing. Then from farther away, somewhere deeper in the trees beyond our camp, I heard screaming. Real screaming. A woman screaming full panic. It sounded exactly like my other friend, Mara. That is the only reason I opened the tent. I thought something had happened to her. I unzipped it and came out fast, looking toward where I thought the scream had come from, but both Leah and Mara were already outside their tents. That should have made me feel better. It did not. They were standing a few feet apart, barefoot and stiff, facing their own tents, not looking at me and not looking towards the woods, just staring at their own tents in front of them. I said both of their names, but there was no response. I said them louder and stepped towards Leah first because she was closer. She was standing so still that for a second I thought she was asleep on her feet or something. I reached out and grabbed her shoulder to turn her toward me. Her eyes were rolled up so far that I could only see the whites. That is the last clear thing I remember before I passed out. I know people say I blacked out casually all the time. I mean, I actually went down. I fully fainted. My body just quit for no reason. And when I woke up, both of them were crouched next to me, shaking me and asking me what happened. I started crying because I could see their faces that they had no idea what I had seen. I asked if they remembered being outside the tents, and they said no. Leah said she woke up because I screamed. Mara said the same thing, and neither one of them remembered leaving their tents. Neither one remembered standing there, and neither one of them remembered the voice. I told them we needed to leave immediately. Not in the morning, not after coffee, but absolutely immediately. They could tell from how I was acting that I wasn't kidding, so for once nobody argued with me. We threw everything we could into the car and left everything else that wasn't essential. I didn't care. I wanted out immediately. We drove in silence for a long time, and I didn't tell them the whole thing until we were nearly back on the highway because I could barely talk without feeling like I was going to throw up. When I finally told them, both of them denied all of it. Of course, not in a mean way, they just genuinely did not remember. Leah cried because she thought I was saying that she had been messing with me and forgot somehow. Mara got angry and said I must have dreamed some of it after hearing an animal or something in the woods. Maybe, except I know what I saw, and I know what I heard call my name before any of us were outside. A week later, Leah texted me and asked if I had unpacked a green hoodie by mistake because she couldn't find hers. I hadn't. It was one of the things left in her tent. Then she sent another text right after that and said, "Never mind." I asked what that meant. She called me instead of texting back, and she sounded strange, quiet. She said she found her hoodie hanging in her bedroom closet at home, still smelling like campfire. Nobody had gone back for anything. I asked if she was sure it was the same one, and she got irritated and said, "Obviously." That was the only time either of them ever gave me anything that made me feel less crazy. We don't talk about that trip now. People ask why I don't go camping, and I usually make a joke about hating bugs or that I have a bad back or whatever. It's just easier that way. But the truth is, I still dream about waking up in that tent and hearing my friend's voice outside, sounding almost like her. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
I can't make this stuff up. In my line of storytelling, you would think I've heard it all, but just when I think that, another creature or being pops into existence. Have we ever heard of Snake Man? I know that sounds ridiculous, but the woman telling this story says this absolutely 100% happened to her multiple times. She says that this is a memory that floats back to the surface from time to time, and she had an experience with a being or creature that she would refer to as Snake Man. When she was little and her mother stopped allowing her to sleep in bed with her, her mom moved her to essentially a mudroom, which acted as her bedroom. She said there were literally a washer and dryer inside this room, and there was a door that led to the outside, and it was always locked from the inside with a deadbolt lock. She made the best of it. It was cute enough, and she said she had a day bed in there. Now, she said it wasn't the space that was scary. It was what happened frequently at night. Almost every night, she would wake up to the sound of that door opening, despite the fact that it had been locked from the inside. Once it would swing open, she said there was always this weird misty fog that came in first, and an ambient light that shined kind of throughout the room. And then entered this being. He would come in and observe her for a little while, almost dispassionately. And then he would stride past her and go out through the room and down into the hallway. She said she referred to him as Snake Man because his upper chest and head looked like a big rearing snake. And she says, and once I became older, I do realize how ridiculous that does sound, especially because the rest of him looked like a normal human being. He would have on this Columbo-style knee-length brown jacket on. He had normal arms, legs, and even shoes on. She says, and he didn't feel or seem ridiculous though. He was absolutely terrifying to her. She even said that he had a menacing demeanor to him. It kept happening so frequently, this door being opened up despite the fact that it was locked from the inside. And she did make a comment that she would not have been able to even reach to unlock this door unless she stood up on something. But she did get blamed for it from her parents. So she decided she's going to sleep on the couch in the living room instead of that bedroom. And she did so for several years until the family eventually did move out of that house. All right, guys, what are your thoughts? Are we thinking alien, interdimensional being? It's really interesting that this story popped up because I only recently saw elsewhere talk about serpent humanoid beings that literally looked like this person's description, which now I feel like I need to go down a rabbit hole. Anyway, drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you have a weird or unexplainable story of your own, I would love to hear it. And if you're new here, follow for more creepy story time.
Let's read some creepy camping wilderness stories. These are my favorite. I was doing a quick solo overnighter in West Virginia with my dog in the late fall to test out some new gear. The section of the trail was off the beaten path and had no real overlooks, water points, scenic areas, shelters, etc. I was about 10 miles from the closest trailhead, just flat woods and a rarely traveled trail. As it got dark, I moved about 300 yards off trail and found a small cliff face. I walked around it and set up camp in a draw, completely out of sight of the trail. The sun sets. It's been dark for a few hours. I have a very small fire going and am reading quietly while my dog is snoozing. Suddenly, my dog becomes alert and stares up at the top of a cliff. A minute goes by and he stands up and starts growling softly. I get out of my hammock and shine a light at the top of the cliff. There is some middle-aged dude just standing there wearing a camo army poncho with the hood up. It wasn't raining and it wasn't going to. He was just staring at me. I said hi and asked if everything was okay. He didn't say a word, just stared at me for another 15 seconds, then turned around and walked out of sight. Never saw him again. Okay, y'all, wait, I have a personal scary story that is kind of similar to this, but it's more like paranormal, I think. I was gonna wait to have my boyfriend tell this story like on a podcast or something, and maybe I still will. But I'm gonna go ahead and tell y'all right now because it kind of makes sense with this story. Okay, anyway. So my boyfriend was telling me, he was like, I have like this scary memory that I don't know if it's real or not. We all have those, and those are so confusing. but he said whenever he was younger, he was camping with his grandparents somewhere in the desert, maybe Arizona. I'm pretty sure it was Arizona. And he said they were sitting like at the bottom of a cliff, just like this person was. That was like where their campsite was. And he said that they looked to the top of the cliff and there was like something that looked like a man standing at the top of this cliff, just being weird, standing there. And they said like hello to him, no response. Anyway, I guess his grandparents just kind of fucked it off, whatever, like don't care. But my boyfriend was still staring at this person, this thing. And he says while he was staring at it, it flew away. Yep, that sounds like a real life Jeepers Creepers. My jaw was literally on the floor. And he says that his grandparents don't talk about it. And that makes me believe that something happened, okay? Anyway, let's get into the next story. Southern Indiana had a friend drop me off at the trailhead just after dark. A crappy old truck was behind us, and they slowed down as I was getting my gear out. There were no suitable trees in the campsite, so I set up my hammock about 75 feet away. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by a commotion and headlights shining into my campsite. I heard multiple people milling around and heard them saying, "I thought you said someone got dropped off here." And, "He must have hiked off in the dark." I was never so glad to be stealth camping in my life. Starting off an easy overnighter in the Olympics, arrived at the trailhead around 2 p.m. on a Thursday. Upon arrival, there was one other vehicle in the small parking area, a beat-up old full-sized van. Didn't think anything of it, one way or another. Began the hike, and within the first quarter mile or so, I passed a woman returning toward the trailhead, wearing an empty baby front pack carry thing. I did not pass any other people on the trail or see any evidence of a baby. I've spent a good amount of time solo backpacking in the actual wilderness. I've also done a lot of car camping in desolate places, and I've only ever been scared or had something weird happen once. I was set up just off of a Forest Service road in Washington. I had been there for several hours, and everything seemed fine. I was sitting next to the fire, enjoying the cold, late fall night air. Then it was like a switch had been flipped. I was overcome with terror and dread. Everything changed. I felt almost paralyzed with fear. I jumped into the rig, locked up, and laid in bed all night. I just listened and waited. I would have just driven off, but this truck setup had a master switch on the truck battery, and I had turned it off when I arrived. To leave meant that I would have to go back outside, and there was no way I was going to do that. I felt like a kid laying in bed, scared of something coming out of the closet. I laid there like that all night, and nothing happened. I got the fuck out in the morning. I never heard or saw anything directly, but I knew something wasn't right. I haven't experienced anything like that before or after. Hell, I've seen a wolf 20 yards away from my tent before and slept like a baby that night. Nothing has ever affected me like that night in Washington. Humans are animals, and we have instincts to protect us. Something was definitely watching them that night. Southern Florida on native land, or what used to be, heard stories from a friend who had stayed in the woods a few times there, but they sounded ridiculous. It's midnight, pitch black. I'm lurking around as the fire is out, making sure all my gear is with me before I sleep, and I notice a tree's odd shape about 10 feet from me. The only reason I could see the outline or shape of the tree at all was because of the moonlit dirt path just behind it. It looks as if there's someone or something standing behind the tree, peering around from behind it. I can make out the shape of a head and shoulders, so I take one long step to my right to further expose what is behind the tree to me. And as I do, the thing or person standing behind the tree takes one step in the opposite direction to keep themselves mostly concealed. But they didn't make a stepping motion. It's almost like they floated or gilded. It was such a smooth motion. I took one more step to make sure what I was seeing wasn't a trick, and once again, I could see the silhouette of this thing up against the dirt path move further behind the tree as to keep itself hidden. If that dirt path wasn't there, I wouldn't have noticed whatever it was watching us. I knelt down and slapped my friend awake, saying there's something watching us from behind the tree, and I booked it faster than I ever ran before until I got to the forest's edge, where there was some civilization, running straight through all of the bushes and spider webs I avoided on my way in. Florida, huh? I need to research more scary stories from Florida because this sounds absolutely terrifying and I need to know more.
Do you know the reason why nothing evil can ever enter your home until you give them permission to enter your home? Is because we are protected by God. We are united by Holy Spirits, and therefore nothing evil can ever enter your home without your permission. I will tell you a story of mine that I experienced. Story time. So I remember I got my first job and had to move away from home, living with my family, parents and siblings, to now living on my own. I was super excited. At the same time, I was scared. Anyway, I've heard stories about evil spirits living in people's homes and also people inviting evil spirits without knowing. So I did my research. I made sure I did cleansing. I made sure I prayed before moving into that home. First few months was smooth. Didn't experience anything. Everything was good. Anyway, my siblings decided to come and visit me because they were on school holidays for a week. So I took the week off work and I was excited to have them. When they arrived there, everything was fine the first night. Second night, we decided to have a movie night. They were tired and they wanted to go to bed early. So I was happy. I carried on watching the movie. But then, a couple of minutes into them going to sleep, I could hear voices coming from outside. I could hear people whispering, people laughing. It was a mixture of adults and children voices. And we live in the middle of nowhere. So I was wondering which family could be out there at that time of the night. Anyway, I didn't pay mind to it. Then one of my siblings started screaming. I thought he had a nightmare. I rushed into the bedroom. I checked. He was screaming and saying, please do not allow them in. They're coming to hurt us. I was alarmed. I was scared. But then when I checked, he is fast asleep. So I thought it's a nightmare. I didn't think nothing of it. I went back downstairs, carry on watching the movie. But tell me why I could hear a banging knock on my door. I checked the peephole. I couldn't see anything. So I went to sit down. I could hear voices followed by a banging noise. Then it was a voice of a child. It sounded exact same as one of my siblings, the one that had the nightmare, saying, please let me in. I'm scared. It's freezing out here. Then I sat quiet. I checked the peephole and I couldn't see anything. I went to sit back down again. I could hear him again crying. This time, voice getting louder and louder. He's telling me, please, sister, let me in. It's freezing cold. Do you want me to be dead? I thought, what is going on here? When I checked, I could see a figure stood outside. It was something I have never seen before. It had exact same features as my sibling. This scared the heck out of me. Anyway, I rushed to the bedroom to check on my siblings. They were all fast asleep. When I went back down, I checked. That figure was gone. So next day, I decided to ask one of the neighbors if they have ever experienced anything like that. He tells me the most chilling thing I wasn't expecting. He said there were a family living there years ago. Their son disappeared into thin air. Ever since, anyone who lived in that house would get haunted by that boy's spirit. I had chills and I didn't even know what to do. I soon had to move out, regardless that I still had a lot of months left on my lease. But people, nothing evil can ever enter your home until you give them permission to enter your home. If I had opened that door, I would have given him permission to enter the house that I was living in.
If anyone on here knows any TV producers, streaming companies, or has any connection to the film industry, I've got a great idea. Okay, we make this show that is like Tales from the Crypt. Okay, it recreates a story. We have me at the beginning narrating the story, and we tell real life scary stories, and we bring them to life. Some of the stories that are even on my channel, right? And I mean, I think it would be an amazing idea. Like, people would love it. And I think that, this has the potential to be something new that would be great for something like one of these streaming companies, or, even one of these television stations. Like, let's make this happen. So if you know anybody, pass this information on. Let's see if we can reach a TV producer, or someone with the streaming services, and get this idea turned into a TV show. I would be happy to give my ideas, my stories, and completely narrate this. Now, I'm telling you, this could be one of the coolest ideas in the last 10 years. So if you know anybody, pass this information on and have them get in touch with me, because I think we could definitely do something. Believe it or not, there is a doll more terrifying than Annabelle. Now, this story didn't get much news coverage, and not much is known about it, but it took place in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, and the story goes, there was this husband and wife. Now, the husband worked as an architect, and he would often travel overseas. Now, their son, he really wanted a Teletubby doll. And at this time in the 90s, there was this crazy obsession, and everyone wanted to find this doll. But you couldn't get it at any store. It was sold out. So the father, who's overseas on a work trip, he finds one of these Teletubby dolls, and he buys it. And he brings it back to the son. Well, the first couple of days, the son's happy, he loves this toy, and he's playing with it all the time. But then one night, everyone was in bed. The mother, she wakes up, and she starts tossing and turning, and she couldn't sleep. So she got up out of bed, and she walked towards the kitchen. As she's in the hallway, she hears this loud banging sound coming from her son's room. So she immediately goes to his room, she opens the door, and she finds the son with his legs up on the bed, hanging off, and right next to him is this Teletubby doll. So she says to her son, like, what are you doing? Why are you out of bed? Like, what's going on? What was that sound? And the son's like, it was nothing. It was nothing. So the mom picks him up, puts him back into bed, and she takes the doll and she sets it over on this chair. As she's walking out of the bedroom, this doll started to talk. The voice box started to go off. And she thought that was strange because her son's in bed, the doll's all the way over on this chair, and there was nothing pressing the button. So she's like, okay, that's kind of eerie. She closes the door and she goes into the kitchen. And over the next couple of weeks, she keeps hearing noises at night in her son's room. And when she goes in there, she finds her son always on the floor or, hanging off the bed. And when she asks her son, what's wrong, he says nothing. And then she starts to notice the dog. The dog did not like this doll. And every time it would go around the doll, it would growl. So one day she's in the kitchen sitting drinking some coffee. She starts hearing the dog growling. So she tells the dog, just leave the doll alone. Like, get away from it. And all of a sudden, this dog lets out a yelp. And it starts crying. And it books it into the kitchen and goes right under her legs. And when she comes out into the hallway where this doll is, she sees the doll sitting in the chair. And that kind of freaked her out a little bit. But she thought, I'm just imagining things, like it's nothing. So this strange stuff kept going on, where her son would, fall out of the bed and the dog would be scared. And then one night she gets up out of bed. She thinks, I better go check on my son. So she goes towards his room, but in another room, she starts hearing the dog growling. And she thinks, why is the dog like in this other room? Like, how did he get in there? So she goes to the bedroom. She opens the door. The dog isn't in there. But there is the doll on the floor. So instantly she said, you know what? Like, I'm done with this doll. I'm getting rid of it. So the next day she takes this doll and she gives it to a thrift store. And after a couple months, like, everything is fine. But then one day she receives a phone call and she starts hearing the voice box of that doll saying hi, hello, and then giggling. And for months, she would continuously receive phone calls from this doll, from a random number. And still to this day, no one knows what happened to that doll or where it went, but it was known as one of the creepiest doll stories in the United States. This is a res story I heard near Cherokee, North Carolina. There was this guy who said when he was younger and he lived with his parents that his dad would, at night, they had these pieces of plywood attached to hinges that they would close over the windows and they would padlock. And he always wondered why every night his dad would padlock the windows shut. Well, one day he decided to ask his father, and he said, "Father, why do you lock the windows at night? Like, what are you trying to keep out?" And his dad just looks at him and says, "You don't ask about that. We don't talk about it. Like, you ask anymore, you're going to be grounded. You're going to be in trouble." And he was like, surprised that his dad was so angry when he'd asked that question. And so he always wondered in the back of his mind, like, what was he trying to keep out of the house? Well, one night he is in his bedroom and he's having trouble sleeping. And he looks over at his alarm clock and it's exactly 3:03 a.m. And he starts hearing, and he hears this whistling, like coming from outside of the house. And he keeps hearing it over and over again. So he gets up and he goes out into the living room and he goes, and his dad is out there kind of frantically moving back and forth, pacing around. And he goes, "Dad, why are you, like, what is that whistling? Like, why are you up? And what is that whistling sound? Like, are you making that?" And he goes, No, stop talking about it. Look, you need to go back into your bedroom and go to sleep. It'll be all right." And he said his dad was just like terrified. And so he went back into his bedroom and he said it went on for a little bit and then it stopped. And he said he started to realize, like, late at night, every time at 3:03 a.m., right, he would hear whistling and it would sound like it was coming from outside the house. And his dad would be up, just sort of walking the hallways, walking the floors, like freaking out. So, he was always confused about what this sound was. So one day he goes over to the neighbor's house and he goes, "At night we hear this whistling sound and it happens every night, at the same time. Like, do you know anything about it? Do you hear the whistling?" And he said, the neighbor said, "You need to go home right now." It's like, and his neighbor wouldn't talk about it and was like creeped out and like instantly like went inside his house. So he kept trying to get it out of people in town. Like, does anybody know about like this whistling sounds that happen at night? Like, do you know what that is? No one would talk about it. So one night he is like hanging out with his brother in his bedroom, and they decided they were going to kind of stay up late telling some scary stories. Well, at like 3:03 in the morning, they hear, and they hear the whistling. And he tells his brother, like, "Do you hear that?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Every morning I hear that at like 3:03 and like dad freaks out and stuff." And his brother's like, "Well, why don't you just like try and open one of the windows up and, see if you could get the key, unlock the padlock and look out the window." And he's like, "What? No, are you kidding? Like, dad would freak out. Dad would freak out." And his brother's like, "Well, if you're not brave enough, I'll go do it." So he said his brother like snuck out into his parents' bedroom and got like his dad's keys and went over to one of the windows, unlocked it, and then moved the plywood away from the window. And when he looked out the window, he sort of just jumped back and he turned around and had just this look of dread on his face. And he didn't talk, he didn't say anything. And so he kept asking his brother, like, "What did you see? What did you see?" And his brother wouldn't say anything. And his brother's like, I'm going to go to bed." And he said right as his brother started walking to the bedroom, all of a sudden at the door, he hears boom, 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 boom. Someone is knocking at the door. And he hears it again. Boom, 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 boom. This loud knocking. And he goes up to the door and gets really close. And all of a sudden, his dad comes running out and grabs him and says, "Do not open that door, son." And he's like, why, who's out there? Like, who's outside? And he's like, we can't say anything about it. We don't talk about it. Like, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And he said all night long, they heard the knocking on the door. So the next morning when he gets up, right, his brother is very, very ill. And it's like his brother just got worse and worse. And then eventually, and he said he always attributed his brother what he had seen out of that window. Like, maybe that is what was the cause of what happened to him. And he said still to this day, his father will not talk about it, what was outside the house.
Want to get creeped out? Have you ever heard of the Loveland Frogman? In Loveland, Ohio, about 25 miles from Cincinnati, is one of my favorite cryptids, the Loveland Frogman. Sightings date back to the 1950s, but this creature has also been seen in modern times. This is a bipedal frog creature, okay? A frog walking on two legs. The first sighting starts with something that sounds a lot like an urban legend to me. An unnamed businessman saw this creature along the Little Miami River. It was walking upright on two legs, was standing 3 to 4 feet tall. It had leathery greenish skin and was resembling a humanoid frog. Immediately, I'm thinking the Fae. Tell me if anyone else is thinking that. Anyways, this guy said there's actually more than one, and that these things were conversing with each other and gesturing with their hands, talking the way that humans do. Or, me, I talk a lot with my hands. He stated that one produced a wand-like object and that the object emitted sparks, which startled the guy, so he ran away. That being said, there were multiple versions of the story. There's no data. There's no corroboration. The man was never identified. This is definitely one of those friend of a friend stories. But then, in 1972, a police officer named Ray Shockey encountered Frogman. He was also near the Little Miami River. While driving at night, he saw a bipedal lizard-like creature around 4 feet tall with a frog-like face, webbed feet, and leathery skin. He was startled and drove away. Then we have Mark Matthews, another police officer. He saw this thing about 2 weeks later. He was responding to what he thought was a dead animal. But when he approached the creature, it suddenly ran. He shot it, later recovering the body and identifying it as an iguana with a missing tail. Immediately, I'm thinking of basilisk lizards. They can be bipedal for a little bit at least. They walk on water like Jesus. And apparently even iguanas can do this. There's probably other lizards that can do this. Are iguanas and reptiles really just fairies? I think that's what I'm going to choose to believe here. Regardless, whether this sighting had anything to do with the other one, it was woven in with the Frogman lore. But in 2016, a couple was playing Pokemon Go near Lake Isabella in Loveland. They reported seeing an actual giant frog around 4 feet tall that stood up and walked on its hind legs. The couple took photos, recorded a video, and it reignited the interest in the Frogman. Now, iguanas can grow up to 7 feet long. So if it is an iguana, it makes sense with the height and everything like that. And it would be alarming seeing a reptile walk on two legs, especially if you don't have iguanas just wandering around where you're from. I do know that Ohio is home to some reptiles. Truthfully, I'm not knowledgeable on all of the different kinds. Let me know if you know in the comments. Tell me what you think about this in the comments. Is this a walking frog? Is this an iguana? Is this the Fae? And the Fae are just iguanas and frogs?
I woke up at 3:17 a.m. and I couldn't breathe after what I saw. So I've had a few things happen over the course of my life, and one of them is very vivid dreams. The very first one happened in my bedroom. Let me give you a little bit of context of the layout. When you go to walk out of my room and go into the hallway, there's 2 big mirrors. And so when you're laying in my bed, you can see the mirrors in the hallway. This is important to know. I always keep my bedroom door closed. My dream went like this. So I woke up with my bed made, and my head is where my feet usually are, and my feet were where my head usually is, so I was all the way turned around. My bedroom door was open, and I was struggling to open my eyes at first, but after I got them open, I saw a woman in my hallway facing the mirror, but also looking back at me. So I got up, and I started to walk towards her, and she told me, "This is the day that you die." I can't remember the date for the life of me, but I remember waking up feeling very overwhelmed and very uneasy. This happened when I was in high school. I didn't have any crazy dreams up until a couple years down the line. I'm now 20. I'm 20 years old and I live in a small apartment with my boyfriend. We've been together for 3 years and nothing like this has ever happened. But over the last 2 months, I've had 3 different dreams that have felt so real and so scary. The first one wasn't anything too crazy. Basically, we're in my apartment and everything looks completely normal. The only thing that's weird is there's a blanket hovering, floating in the air. It slowly came back down and landed on the ground, and I remember thinking it was a little bit of a weird dream, but it wasn't anything too scary. The second dream, I can't fully explain it. It just felt really heavy all around, really bad vibes. Anyways, so that was that, and then there was a third dream. But the third dream, that's the one that I can't shake. So my boyfriend and I are sitting again in our apartment, and I look over and he's just sitting on the couch. Next to him, again, there was this blanket, and it was starting to float up, kind of like it did in the first dream. So I went over there and I went to go smack it down, but there was something solid under it. And so I took it and I grabbed it and I moved it, and there was nothing there. That's when I turned to look back at my boyfriend, and it was not him. He looked completely different. His eyes were completely white, his mouth was wide open, and he was screaming. Not talking, not yelling, screaming. And then everything else in the room started to lift up and float in the air. I panicked, and the only thing that I could think to do in my dream was to grab my Bible. I started praying, yelling, get out, over and over again. And then that's when I woke up, and it was 3:17 a.m. And I felt something so heavy, like it was sitting on my chest. So I just kind of laid there trying to catch my breath. I'm too scared to move. Eventually, I shifted my head over to look at my boyfriend. And that was the worst part, because he was still asleep, exactly in the same position that he was in my dream. I've never had a dream that has felt so real before. Now the question is, was this some kind of sleep paralysis, or was this some kind of message going on in my dream that I don't understand? Can anybody help with this?
Part of my job is going to care homes to collect prescriptions to take back to the pharmacy in order for them to arrange the delivery of their medications. I've been doing this job for almost 2 years, so you get to know the care homes in the area. A couple of months ago, I went to a home that I'd never been to before. When I arrived, I was sure I was at the wrong place, as it looked to be a big, old, abandoned house. I even rang my manager, and he said he wasn't sure, but to just go and try the door. The gardens were overgrown, and the building was generally very run down. I even had to walk through some big creepy iron gates which creaked, and I came to the conclusion that I'm at the beginning of a horror film. When I got to the door, it was slightly open, so I pushed it and I went in. The place smelt like an abandoned house, all musty and damp. The carpets were bogging, and the walls looked like they'd seen better days. There were old people just wandering around and not really taking any notice. Like I said, I've been doing this job a while, and I also used to be a carer in a home, but this felt off. Someone then came up to me. I introduced myself, told them I was collecting prescriptions for the pharmacy. They gave me the signed scripts, and I was on my way. I couldn't stop thinking about how that place should be shut down. That was the only time I'd ever been to or even heard of that home. Until yesterday. I started my route and noticed the name of the home. I was going again to collect prescriptions. I knew straight away that it was that home, and when I arrived, it still looked as abandoned and haunted as the last time. I went through the creaky gates again, and at the foot of the steps up to the door, there was just the biggest dead rat I've ever seen, just to add to the creepiness. The door was locked, so I started banging on the glass. Then someone who lived in the house opposite shouted over to me that this place is abandoned. I was like, excuse me? I ran back to my van, leaping over the rat on the way. I called the care home's number and asked if they'd moved. They said no. I explained where I was, and they told me that I was on the right street, but they're a little further up. I found them, and it was a completely normal-looking home, but one that I've definitely never seen or been to before. I said with a little laugh that I was banging on the abandoned place's door and asked again if they used to be there, and they again said, nope, it's this building. It's always been their care home, and that place, that's never been a care home, the place I was at. I don't know what happened. Was it a time slip? Did I go into another dimension? How did they give me prescriptions for the care home up the road at an abandoned house? Maybe you should come and break into the abandoned place and ask the ghosts if they were winding me up that day. Thank you for reading. I hope you enjoyed.
Send us the address.
Love the pod, and please come to Bristol/Cardiff for your Welsh Huns. Love, Daisy.
We are going to Bristol.
On the morning of Monday, January 7th, 1985, a 31-year-old man arrived at an international airport in order to board his flight to the United States. The man was very nervous. His heart was beating fast, and his palms were sweating so much that he could barely hold the handles of his very heavy, tan-colored suitcase. And the reason he was so nervous is because he was feeling very conflicted about what he was about to do. On the one hand, this trip was something he'd been dreaming of for months, and it was supposed to represent the start of a great brand new life. Now, this man hadn't actually packed very many personal items to take with him. But one thing he had brought was a little bound book full of photographs, which showed what mattered the most to him. And what mattered the most was waiting for him in America. But on the other hand, the man was terrified, because before he could begin this brand new life, he had a huge problem he needed to take care of. And that problem was why he needed to drop off his very heavy suitcase without anybody looking inside of it. And so now, inside the airport, the very nervous man stopped and readjusted his grip on the suitcase handles, and then made his way over to the ticketing area, where he would check his bag for his almost 11-hour flight to California. And then, once he touched down and they landed in California, he could get off the plane, go to the baggage carousel, and get his luggage, and then everything would be fine. Now, of course, he knew this was a big gamble. If it had been possible, he would have just brought this bag with him on the plane to stow it in the overhead bin, but he just couldn't do it because the bag was too big, too heavy. And so really his only other choice, if he wanted the suitcase to make it to California, was to check it like he was doing, because the alternative was leaving it behind, and there was no way he was going to do that. He cared far too much about what was inside of this luggage. And so by the time the man actually got in line in the ticketing and baggage check area, he was so stressed out that he was beginning to feel physically ill. By the time he got to the front of the line, he still felt very sick, but he composed himself enough that he walked up to the counter of the airline he was traveling with, which was Lufthansa Airline, and the employee who was working behind the counter was very cheerful, and they greeted the man and took his passport to verify his information. Then the employee put down the passport and then reached out his hand and gestured for the nervous man to give him his very important suitcase. This was, of course, the moment the man had feared the most, when everything could really go astray. But as calm as he could, he lifted up the suitcase, and for a second he almost panicked because it was just so obviously heavy. He realized the employee might make him open it right there because it just seemed wrong that this suitcase was that heavy. And he knew if that happened, he was done for. He'd be arrested immediately. But instead, the employee just dragged the heavy suitcase over to a conveyor belt behind the counter, and the nervous man watched as the employee heaved the suitcase onto the belt, and the man kept his eyes locked on the suitcase as it rolled down the belt and then disappeared through a pair of rubber flaps at the very end. He was so focused on the bag, he almost didn't notice the airline employee returning to try to hand him his boarding pass for the plane. Finally, the employee literally just waved the ticket in the man's face to get his attention, and it kind of snapped him out of it, and he took the boarding pass, and as calmly as he could, he thanked the employee, and then he turned and hurried off to catch his flight. About 12 hours later, on the other side of the world, another employee of Lufthansa Airlines walked around the baggage claim area at Los Angeles International Airport, which is typically just called LAX. It was about 2 p.m. Los Angeles time, and the employee was working in the international terminal. It was his job to monitor the circular carousels where passengers picked up their luggage after their flights, and his job was to make sure no bags were left behind. And as he was making one of these loops, he noticed there was a tan-colored suitcase with soft sides sitting all alone on one of the carousels. The employee stopped and checked the monitor above the carousel to see the last time this carousel had been used by an incoming plane, and it was quite a while ago, and all the passengers clearly had come through and picked up their luggage, except for this one lone bag. So, based on the timing, the employee figured that, well, this bag must be unclaimed. But this was not remotely concerning to him. Luggage went unclaimed all the time. Sometimes because bags were sent to the wrong airport, or because the suitcase's owner missed their flight, or even just forgot to get it. But whatever the reason was, it was this employee's job to simply start the process of identifying the owner of the suitcase. So, like he always did, he walked over to the carousel and grabbed the suitcase handle and went to pick it up. But when he did, he let out a sort of surprised grunt and stumbled because the suitcase was so much heavier than he had expected. So he went back and he grabbed the handle with a better grip this time with two hands and braced himself and yanked, and the suitcase kind of toppled over and fell off the carousel onto the floor. And this was also around the time that the employee noticed that this really heavy suitcase had no tags on it. And so now this bag did seem very unusual. The extreme weight and no tags, that's not normal. So he knelt down and he began to unzip the suitcase to see what was inside. He was legally allowed to do this because unclaimed bags at airports are subject to search. But he had only unzipped it a little bit before he froze, and for a second he just stared in shock at what was inside of the suitcase.
Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
But then he immediately got to his feet, just left the bag there, and ran to go find a phone to call the police. A little less than 2 hours later, around 3:45 p.m., Detective Don Ravens of the Los Angeles Police Department's Pacific Division stood in the baggage area of LAX's International Terminal, looking down grimly into the tan suitcase that was lying open on the floor. He was surrounded by officials from the LAPD, as well as the FBI, who had all been called to the airport because of what was found inside of the suitcase: the dead body of a young woman. Detective Ravens was shocked. He guessed this woman was maybe less than 30 years old, and judging by her features and dark hair, he thought she could be from an Asian or Latin American country. But that was about as far as he could get, since she didn't have any identification with her, and there were no tags on the bag. There were also no obvious wounds on her body, so he couldn't immediately tell how she died. Ravens spent some time speaking to airline and airport employees, including Customs, which is the government agency that's in charge of inspecting bags that are coming in and out of the country. And he was puzzled as to how a suitcase with a body inside of it had somehow cleared Customs. But an agent explained that they didn't actually open up all the suitcases, which meant whoever checked this bag through Customs had taken a huge risk, because realistically, they could have been searched and then the body would have been found. So this suggested a certain level of desperation, but apparently this risk this person took to check the bag had paid off, because the bag had gone all the way to California. But despite that, Ravens didn't find much to go on here. At this moment, the victim was a Jane Doe, which meant there was no identification for her, and Ravens knew she could really be from anywhere in the world, despite, his snap judgment that perhaps she was from an Asian or Latin American country. And because LAX was an international airport, whoever checked this bag and potentially even put her into the suitcase could now be anywhere in the world too. Once Detective Ravens and the other investigators had finished examining the body as it was found inside of the suitcase, they didn't actually pull her body out. They sent the suitcase and her body to the coroner. Hopefully, an autopsy would turn up evidence that could tell Ravens and the other investigators who this Jane Doe was and what happened to her. The following day, on Tuesday, Ravens sat down at his desk and he opened up a manila folder he had been given. Inside of it was his Jane Doe's autopsy report. And when the detective began reading it, he couldn't help but feel sick, because what he was reading told him that this poor woman had died a horrible, torturous death. The report said the woman had bruises all over her body, like the kind you would get from repeated heavy blows delivered over a period of at least several hours while she was still alive, and her actual eventual cause of death was ultimately suffocation, which meant she either was suffocated and then put into the suitcase, or was in the suitcase, trapped inside of there, and suffocated. Ravens put down the report and leaned back in his chair and just sort of thought through what he had just learned. Based on the autopsy, he now knew this poor woman had died a brutal, awful death, but the coroner had not found any identifying information or anything on her that would give away or help to give away who she actually was or who did this to her. So really he had very little here other than knowing this lady suffered. Ravens had spent the last 24 hours poring over all the surveillance footage from the airport security cameras, looking for any suspicious passengers leaving without any luggage. But nothing had jumped out at him. He had also interviewed a bunch of airport employees who would have been in the baggage claim area on the day the body was found, but none of them had noticed anything strange either. And so, despite it only having been one day since this woman was found, Ravens was already worried that this case was going to go cold. But what Ravens had not counted on was the huge amount of publicity his Jane Doe would generate. The TV news, as well as the newspapers, were reporting feverishly on the body that was found in the LAX suitcase. And by Wednesday, so 48 hours after the body was found, the reporting had made it all the way to Peru, where a man named Juan Espinoza contacted authorities to report that the body might actually belong to his wife. Officials in Peru called the LAPD, and Juan's report ended up on Ravens' desk. Ravens opened up that report and began reading. Juan and his wife lived in Peru's capital city of Lima, but his wife had been trying to leave Peru to escape poverty. She had left their home hoping to basically sneak into the United States so she could get a job there and then send money back to her family in Peru. She had promised Juan that she would contact him when she arrived in America, but after she left, Juan said he never heard from her. This report felt like a promising lead to Ravens. Juan and his wife checked a lot of boxes, especially because, Ravens' Jane Doe had features that indicated she could be from a South American country like Peru. And so Ravens wondered if Juan's wife had tried to get into America by using a human smuggler, which is someone who transports immigrants across borders illegally. Human smuggling was obviously an unregulated industry, and Ravens knew smugglers could be very violent or reckless, and the people they were transporting often had no protection. Meaning, sometimes when people would go to these smugglers to try to get help to go to these other countries, sometimes the smuggler wouldn't help them. They would just rob them, or in some cases, rob them and then kill them and dispose of their body. And unfortunately, again, because there's no regulation or oversight, a lot of times these horrible crimes would just go unnoticed. And so maybe if that's what had happened to Raven's Jane Doe, it would explain why the tags were ripped off the suitcase. The smuggler who, committed this crime would not have wanted to leave any ID on or around the body that could be traced back to them. And so Ravens picked up his phone to call the LAX airport operations manager to see if he could get the logs for any flights coming from Peru to LAX on the day the body was found. And that was when he discovered there was a big problem with this theory, because there were no flights from Peru. The only flights that day that used the luggage carousel where the body was found were from Korea, Japan, and Germany. And there weren't any flights that originated in Peru that had layovers in those countries either, which meant it just wasn't possible that his Jane Doe was Juan's wife. And so now Ravens was stumped all over again. He had almost no evidence to go on. All he really had was the suitcase and the body. And the actual crime scene itself was maybe somewhere in Korea or Japan or Germany. And so Ravens really didn't have a good idea of where he should begin looking for more evidence. But then he got an idea. Detective Ravens got up from his desk and headed straight to the evidence room. He put on a pair of disposable gloves and he found the box that contained evidence from Jane Doe's case, and he opened it up. And there really wasn't much. All that was in there were pieces of jewelry and some clothing that were found on the woman's body. And all of it had already been examined for trace evidence like blood or hair. However, blood and hair were not what Ravens was looking for. One at a time, he lifted out each of the sealed plastic bags that contained Jane Doe's belongings until he got to her blue sweater. He took the sweater out of the plastic and he turned it over in his hands and then checked inside the neckband. And there he found exactly what he was looking for. Immediately, he felt a rush of adrenaline. He was onto something here. And so he reached back into the box and he grabbed another plastic bag with a pair of gray pants in it. And he did the same thing. He looked at the waistband. Then he opened a third bag and he checked inside of her blouse. And each time, his hunch had been right. Jane Doe's clothing had labels sewn into them. And the labels were clearly written in some language that was not English. Ravens wasn't sure, but to him, he thought maybe the letters looked Middle Eastern. It didn't take long for the FBI to help Ravens and the LAPD identify the origin of Jane Doe's clothing. All of it had been made in the Middle East, in Iran. This meant that finally, Detective Ravens had a likely country of origin for his Jane Doe. But he also had another problem now. Really, he had the same problem he'd had when he thought his victim was from Peru. And that was that there were only 3 international flights that his Jane Doe could have been on. And none of them originated in Iran. And there were no connecting flights from Iran that day either. And so Ravens needed the public's help. On Thursday, so 3 days after the body was found, he and another detective sat down with a reporter from the city's newspaper, the Los Angeles Times, a publication that's read all over the world. And Raven and this other detective's goal was, to give as many updates as they could about the case, hoping that somebody somewhere would read the story, recognize a detail, and come forward. However, that's not really how the interview played out. By the end of it, Ravens was feeling pretty discouraged by all the questions he and his partner just couldn't answer. In fact, the last thing he said to the reporter, which ended up getting printed as the sort of last line of the story, the lasting impression, if you will, was, "Don't be too surprised if you never find out where she came from or who she is." The next morning, Detective Ravens got to his office and had barely taken off his coat when his phone rang. A police officer from Sacramento, California was on the other line, and he sounded all worked up. He told Ravens that he knew that, the LA investigators had been working on the airport Jane Doe case, and even though it wasn't going anywhere, he knew it was a big deal for them. But he told Ravens that he actually had this unbelievable development in Northern California that was connected to the airport Jane Doe case. He said authorities in Northern California had just found another body. But when Ravens heard this, his first reaction was not excitement that there was new evidence or something. It was confusion. He didn't need another body. He needed to find his Jane Doe's name. And so he asked the Sacramento officer, what he meant. Had they found another woman in another suitcase or something? But the Sacramento officer said no. The body belonged to a man. and this guy's name had never even been on police radar. He had died from a gunshot wound, 400 miles away from Raven's Jane Doe, but the officer said that the story they had uncovered behind this new body would likely solve Raven's Jane Doe case. This is the story that the Sacramento officer told Ravens. On the evening of Monday, January 7th, just a few hours after Jane Doe's body had been found at LAX, a man named Hadi had picked up his friend and roommate, a 31-year-old man named Mahmoud Ayazi, at the Sacramento airport, which is about 400 miles north of LAX. Hadi was excited to see Mahmoud, who'd been away for a few weeks. They were good friends, and Mahmoud was always very optimistic and fun to be around. But on this day, when Mahmoud got in his car, Hadi immediately noticed that his friend seemed sullen and quiet and just very clearly upset about something. And so Hadi asked him what was wrong. And Mahmoud just said, "Oh, I'm sick with the flu." But to Hadi, Mahmoud did not look very sick. He looked worried and kind of jittery and nervous. And as they started to drive, he kept looking out the windows and out the back of the car, like he was nervous about somebody following them or something. And when they got back to their apartment, Mahmoud went straight to bed. And for the next 2 days, Mahmoud continued acting increasingly weird and paranoid. He asked Hadi to disconnect the phone in their apartment and said he didn't want to see any of their mutual friends. He also kept looking out the windows of their apartment, but whenever Hadi asked what was wrong, Mahmoud refused to explain.
From 1867 to 1974, there were laws called ugly laws. These laws prohibited visibly disabled and diseased individuals from entering public spaces. Now, I found out about ugly laws when I was doing research on my attic here, because when we bought our house and we did a tour, the realtor told us that this room off to the side in our attic may have been used as a quarantine room. Which makes sense because this house was built in 1763, and back in the day, diseases could take out whole bloodlines and entire families. So I was like, yeah, that definitely tracks. Until I posted my very first TikTok on here showing my attic. And everybody freaked out, saying that this is probably not a quarantine room, but may have been used originally as a disappointment room. Okay. Which goes hand in hand with the ugly laws, because a disappointment room is where a family would keep maybe a disabled child or somebody that was disfigured that they wanted to keep out of the public eye. Now, obviously, you can see at one point this was converted into like a shop-like area, but what its original use was, as far as this room, I don't know, and I'm not sure I'm ever going to know. I think a pretty logical explanation is maybe servants' quarters, but this is just one tiny little room, and I don't really know how that worked back in the day, but I just wanted to share that. The comforter is in here. I feel like I need to reiterate. The comforter is in here because I put it up here for a little prank video a couple years ago when we first moved in, and then I ended up leaving it up here because every time I came back, people would be like, the comforter's in a different position or it's changed. That also contributed to why we ended up putting a Ring camera in here. But I just wanted to go over that. It's been a while since I talked about it, and every once in a while people will drop a comment mentioning ugly laws, and I have talked about it before. Wish I knew, guys. Wish I knew exactly what went on around here.
I always love reading for the Green Manor. Kaylee and I did a Halloween episode together. But, okay, I never catch orbs. But did anyone see there was an orb? I swear there was an orb. I didn't read through the comments, so maybe you guys saw it. But it comes up from, like, here, like where the phone is and out right before she starts to talk about the blanket. And then as she's talking about the blanket, I saw something like there's something else, like a glitch or something over that blanket, which is weird because before I saw all of that, because I watched the video a couple times because I have to get a feel for the energy of the space, and I saw a boy right away sitting in the corner here against the wall right behind the blanket. Now, this boy isn't stuck though, because Kaylee's energy and her partner and her animals, they don't hold energy in that space. energies move through there, absolutely. There's all kinds of beings there, yes, but she doesn't hold anyone who needs to cross over. So there's this boy right there in the corner, right behind the blanket. I saw him right away, and I'm going to see if he can tell us what went on in that space. I don't feel like this is a boy that is stuck. I think I'm seeing more of an imprint, and I'll be able to read his experience off of the imprint. So he's sitting there and he's like holding his knees, crouched in the corner, scared. And he has been left in there by himself. I don't feel that he's sick. It feels more like a punishment. He had parents that were physically abusive with him, and they would lock him in there. And he ultimately died in there of starvation. I don't feel I'm speaking to him, and I don't feel that he is there. He's gone. That's just like the imprint. I feel a lot of people, like doctors, but not because of a disease. But there's like doctors moving, like there's a nurse in particular I see that is moving through the space. Again, this isn't a spirit that I'm seeing. This is more trying to get an imprint of what went on there. I feel like they saw patients there. I feel like there was medicine that was doled out there. There was treatments that were given there. Not bad, not bad. These were intended to heal and to help. And so this space feels like I'm seeing rotating people. So it feels very much like it was used as a pharmacy / small private doctor's office at one point also. This is why there's so much energy in that space. And every time she showed you that door's not opening and closing like just because of the hinges. Like there's energy in there moving that door. Different energies. And there even is like, because I'm seeing like the circular motion of people constantly coming through that space. Again, it feels like it was a doctor's office. One doctor, one nurse, and a lot of people rotating through there. In this situation I'm describing, this is separate above and beyond the young boy that I saw there. This is completely different owners, different time. And I don't feel anything bad really happened. I don't feel like people passed there. This was definitely feels like a place of healing. It's interesting though, because when I go to feel like families with children that lived there, it gives me this strange feeling. Like it's like the families that lived there couldn't seem to figure out how to parent kindly. And that room was like just constantly used as a space to like discard, which maybe what I'm describing is exactly what she was saying about, I hate that name. I know she didn't, name it that, but the ugly room, it's just, anyway, that's probably what I'm picking up on, because I just feel this discarding of human life, and just souls just doing this, or the life being sucked out of children because they weren't appropriate, or didn't act or look the way they were supposed to. And just this constant taking, and it's not taking of their life, it's taking their soul, taking their dignity, taking their essence, by just being mean. But I'm feeling this coming from multiple different families that lived there. Like it must have been a common practice. So I do have to validate that, yeah, this room was used as a place to put humans to almost to basically discard them and break their soul. Hopefully that gives Kaylee a little bit more information on what went on there.
We listen, we don't get scared, and we don't judge. Let me give you guys a story time of when my cousin dated this guy, and when they broke up, things went downhill for her because she was dating somebody who practiced witchcraft. So y'all, for story's sake, we are going to call this guy Pepsi, and we're going to call my cousin Barry. Now, Barry was like an older cousin of mine, y'all, and her and Pepsi had been dating from high school through and through, so they had been together for a couple of years. And after high school, Barry was fortunate to go to school, and then she went to school, she graduated, and then she got a job, and she was working a nice job, she had a car, all those good things. And Pepsi as well also worked hard and had a job and. They did not live together, they lived in separate places, but their relationship was a beautiful relationship because it did nothing but just bloom and bloom and bloom. Now things take a turn for the worse because now Pepsi meets a girl at work, likes her, and also starts to date her. This girl made a lot of money. She was in a better position at work, so their relationship made sense. Because this girl would pay Pepsi's installment, car installment, he would pay Pepsi's rent. So Pepsi was just living the life as a queen, being treated like the king that he is. So Pepsi eventually ends things with Barry, and was like, listen, I don't want to waste your time. I've met somebody else. Me and you have been together for so long. I think it's better for us to explore things. No problem. Now, when their relationship ends, Barry was supposed to get a promotion at her job. Unfortunately, she doesn't know what happened with the promotion, and she did not get the promotion. Somebody else got the promotion. And then eventually the company tells the people that they're about to get retrenched, but then nobody gets retrenched. Only Barry lost her job. Only Barry got retrenched. So now, naturally, she can't pay for her car. She can't pay for her apartment no more. She has to move back home. And things just start going. She starts losing weight because obviously she's depressed. She doesn't have a job. She lost her long-time relationship that she thought was going to end in marriage. She doesn't have a car anymore. She's just struggling. And obviously people in the township are laughing at her, and some of them are doing it in her face. So one time Barry decides that she wants to try and commit the unaliving. She doesn't want to be on this world. She doesn't want to be in this world anymore because Pepsi is living his life with his other girlfriend. Their relationship is flourishing. They had been together for a year. Everything is just good, and she is suffering. She attempts, obviously, and she fails. They take her to the hospital. When they get to the hospital, her mom now obviously is telling my grandmother everything that's happening, and my grandmother is like, listen, when she comes out of the hospital, let's go and check the traditional way and see what's going on. For sure, when she leaves the hospital, they talk to her, they advise her. Obviously, at the hospital, they gave her a counselor because she needs one, clearly. And when she gets to my grandmother's village, they take her to a traditional healer. And when they get to a traditional healer, obviously they do their things, and the traditional healer tells them that no, the person that has you tied is the mother-in-law. Your boyfriend, your ex's mother-in-law, Pepsi's mother now, does not want you to flourish. Now, what had happened was initially the mother-in-law went to the traditional healer because she wanted you not to hurt her son because she's seen how her son loves you so much. And then Pepsi added on, was like, listen, if she's not with me, she should not flourish whatsoever. She should not make it in life. She must suffer until I come back in her life. So basically, Pepsi did not want Barry to beat him in life. If she's not with him, she doesn't want her to be out here living her life and looking pretty because he's obviously going to miss her, and he's going to feel bad that he's moved on with somebody else, and Barry is there living her life. Basically just didn't want her to be there at the top without him being there as well. So the traditional healer tells Barry that these people they have your jersey, and that jersey is what they are using to continue whatever spell that they're doing. And what's crazy is they have to actually go and renew the spell. And it's funny because they actually keep on actively going back to renew the spell on you. Mind you, you're not with their son anymore. So the traditional healer is like, that jersey that they have, you either need to go get it, or I will mix my things here and make a plan for it to go away. And obviously Barry's like, I'm never going to speak to those people ever again. Please, dollar what you must. The traditional healer guys dollars. A couple of days later, we hear that Pepsi's mother's house burnt to ashes. Every single thing that was in that house burned to ashes. Now, of course, the jersey was there, so obviously the jersey got burnt as well. And I'm just like, that is crazy. And y'all, literally after all of that happened, Barry decided to dedicate herself to church. She went back to church, guys. She started praying more. She started reading more. She would also like invite me to church sometimes. And when I tell you, within a few months, Barry got an opportunity to work overseas. And as we speak, guys, Barry's working overseas now. She met a man overseas. She got married, you know, she's got kids. Barry's older than me, like she's way older than me. But life worked out, you know? Don't take spiritual things lightly, guys. Pray if you do. Do what you must. Because, you would think that somebody breaks up with you, they don't love you. And then you find out that they are doing things behind your back. Mind you, this is your ex. This is not somebody that you were still dating or whatever. Be careful. Men practice witchcraft too. It's just that it's not a common thing, but they do it as well.
I have no idea why we're freaking out so bad about the existence of aliens. Why? So what? They do exist. I mean, what did you think? Like, we were the center of the universe the entire time? From day one till today, that you thought that we were the only one in this mass universal existence? That we were the only one? Come on now. Seriously. Like, since the day that you were born, you were given identity. You were given a path to life all the way to your last day on this planet. And you thought that you were what? The center of the universe? It makes zero sense. Just look around you. And then for you guys freaking out about like our government officials saying that they are about to make contact, or like we've already made contact with aliens, I hate to break it to you. They've already been here. They've actually been here before the existence of human beings. They're the reason why that we're here. And you can freak out all you want, but let me tell you something. The reason why that you cannot leave this planet is because of them. They made it impossible for you to leave this planet. And they're working with our government officials, our so-called leaders, our elite, to actually keep you blinded, keep you focused, and simply living, paying bills, you know, taking care of different things, buying properties that's not yours, you know, enslave your mind into stress and anxiety and depression in order for you to just, you know, just stay grounded and not wake up and see the complete truth. And you don't want to know why I'm so psyched about the whole thing, and I cannot wait for this moment to happen where this whole truth is actually being revealed and we know exactly that we are not the center of the universe. There are more, way more out there that we don't see, that we don't understand. And then this whole truth is about to come alive. Whether it's this year, next year, 2027, but it's going to be very, very soon that we are going to wake up and accept the fact that we are not alone. We are not. I'm telling you, we are not alone. They've been here since day one. I've seen things that I can't even explain. And I know I've said a lot on this platform, but there are still way more that I haven't even disclosed yet. I have not. It's a lot. I'm taking my time because I want some of you guys, some of you, my followers, who still asking questions, to actually be ready for some of these answers. And right now we need to focus on what's happening. You know, like they're trying to reveal the truth that we already know. But they're doing it very slowly because they think that we're stupid. We're not really seeing the full picture. Look what's happening with the whole rocket launching to the moon. How smart we are. How we are able to use their own technology given to us. We are able to use this technology to actually unveil like the lies, you know, like the green screen, the covering, you know, like they're doing right now, telling us they're on the moon, but we know they're not. It's only to distract us from the fact that like we're about to make contact with some beings that human beings in history of living have not seen before. And they know that we're going to panic. So they're trying to distract us with something else. Pay attention. Keep your eyes open. That's all I can tell you. Stay positive.